Hey guys, this is Sean, the artist behind SeanSean.co and eBay specials. So check that out. Today I'm going to do a review of First Man. So this movie is basically covering Ryan Gosling. It's a movie on the very first mission, Apollo 11 to the moon. So, obviously in this movie they're going to cover a lot of the training, some of the other earlier missions that, were successful or failures that led up to the success of Apollo 11. And they did cover a lot of historical malfunctions in some of the equipment. One thing I thought they could have done differently was, for once, when they're on the Earth and they're just stationary having a, talking heads conversation where they're just rooms or parties or just normal kind of environment, they kind of have this rally camera shake, which looks like an average blogger. I think just the way we're doing it here, lock it off, and then maybe you pivot, you swivel, you do a little bit of movement, and you should follow the characters. I think that's good, but I think they got an overly shaky camera. It looks worse than an amateur blogger. Another flaw, they have obviously shaky cameras in the rockets, which I think is accurate. Some of it was very close, so it would literally be like this close going back and forth, which was really claustrophobic. Of course they want to give the feel of claustrophobia because they're in a space capsule. That thing is minuscule. So, they definitely have to balance that back and forth. I would have done a little bit more focus on the gears and switches and what they're, trying to figure out at, why they're flying. Obviously, the public's not going to follow, but it really makes for way more interesting if they would have made it a little more technical, I think, on, some of the things that were going in the background. Now, as far as the pilots, I think they did a good job. They had a lot of different personalities, a lot of different crews that were, so you never knew that Neil Armstrong was going to be chosen for the space mission. So in this instance, they're really true to how it feels when, as you're going an astronaut, you don't know who's going to die in accidents, who's going to survive, who's going to be chosen for a mission. So in that case, it really flows very well. I think this part of the story they did really well. Another element they have is kind of the backstory for Neil Armstrong with his family. Like, he has a son and then he has a daughter. The daughter has some medical history and then she dies suddenly, so it's really quite horrible for him, but he doesn't really react. And reading up on Neil Armstrong, he was more of a reserved guy, and he definitely, in the later life, he kind of got burned from being too famous, and so he really withdrew from the public eye. So I think this, is kind of true, but it's, I don't know. If I would have met the guy, maybe I would know if they were playing this for her, but he seems very, very reserved. And his wife is always kind of punishing the guy, like, why are you doing this, da-da-da-da, when, the wife would have kind of this backstory of, trying to play like, oh, I'm the nice mother, but my husband's going to get killed next week kind of feel, right? It would be like this tossy-turvy boat, you're all up on a high, he came back, oh, he's going on another mission, came back, came from another mission. So I think that comes across well. And later in his life, Neil Armstrong actually divorces his wife, Janet, which is in the film, and marries for a second time. But so there's kind of always this tension underneath, which you go through too many, stormy days, it kind of doesn't wear well on a relationship. A few are good, they kind of like solidify, but then later it's just, you want to get away from all the stress. So, I think they show this pretty well. And some of his relationship with his kids, they've done pretty well. He's definitely kind of a standoffish kind of dad. So again, I don't know if, I guess that reads right in the sense like he would have been very in control of his emotions because he's doing like a high stress job. So these type of persons are more, they're more given to, very calm sense of presence, almost zen, and then only when they're really stressed do they kind of perk up. So in this and he's very smart, so he would have had kind of slightly Asperger's probably to be this, an astronaut. So, maybe that's a fair portrayal of the actual astronaut. Another thing they did is they really toned down a lot of the patriotism, I think. They did have, like, the flags on the suits and on the capsules and all that, but they didn't do, like, a U.S. faceplant on the moon. The reason they said they did this is they didn't want to say it was an American moment, it was really a humankind moment, which is very true, because they do have shots from the footage, and you can see it was the most watched event ever of all mankind. Like, the Japanese were watching, the French were watching, the Russians were watching, everyone's super hyped that this is going to happen. So in that aspect, they're right. So maybe it was the right decision to tone that down. But on the other hand, it's like when they come back, it's like Neil Armstrong is shell-shocked, and instead, you know, it would have been the happiest day of his whole life probably. You know, he survives. Obviously, he's going to be sorrowful with his kid that died earlier, so he wouldn't be the happiest. Obviously, he'd rather probably have his daughter than been the first man on the moon. But you know, that joy is just unshakable. You can see it in the photos when they're, you know, Nixon comes and shakes their hand, and they're like, whoa, they're just totally starstruck and super happy that they did it. And I think this is kind of missing in the film. They just don't get that sense of happiness, like, dude, we just did this freaking mission, you know? Because you would be super hype on that energy, even if you were like laid back like Neil Armstrong might have been. So, and in this aspect, I don't know if they play that character right. You know, maybe he's behind the scenes a cool guy and he's cool behind the trigger as far as, you know, pilot, but yeah, it kind of fell flat for me. Another thing they really stripped out is a lot of the historical evidence, because it's really a space race between the USSR and US, and they mention it, and they show one footage of, you know, the first cosmonaut that get into space, and they're like, oh my god, we're totally behind, what are we gonna do? And they say, hey, we're gonna skip all these little close to the Earth missions and go straight to the moon, which is how they were able to surpass the Soviets, which is good. But they skimmed over Sputnik, they skimmed over, I mean, Sputnik really drove the reason why the space race started. You know, people were, you know, ratcheting up during the Cold War, and they're building missiles and all this other stuff. But when Sputnik came around, it went across the US sky every night, and there was a huge paranoia, and people started building bomb shelters. They started training kids how to survive an atomic attack at school. And so if they would add just a little bit, like maybe his kids go to school and they're doing atomic attack preparation, or maybe he had a flashback like, oh, I remember when that happened. Another thing, Neil Armstrong was actually in Korea, so one of the reasons why he's such a great pilot is he flew, I think it was like 50 or 70 missions in Korea, so he flew quite a bit, and was obviously very patriotic. He didn't go to Korea just to have fun and fly a jet. You know, going to the moon, it's a neutral thing, right? But flying to Korea, you're flying, you could be shot down and killed, you could be tortured. I mean, look at what happened to John McCain. He was tortured while he was shot down. So, and you see John McCain's character is very strong. Neil Armstrong wasn't political later, so he's true to that in the sense he doesn't get involved in politics as McCain did. But, you know, those guys were pretty freaking hardcore guys. So to strip out kind of the historical background, you kind of have to focus on the NASA program, which is what they did. So I agree with that. However, you just have to have a couple flashbacks, like Sputnik. Cuban Missile Crisis happened right before this kind of picks up, right? There's a couple crises that happen that they skim over, and it doesn't have anything to do with the story, but it's the backstory, and that's very important to show how fearful people were of an atomic attack, how important the space race was to beat the Soviets. And at the same time, they didn't show the parallel. They're developing ICBMs. Like, as they're building these rockets to go to the moon, those same rocket engines are the ICBMs that become the nuclear technology to face off against the Soviets, and they kind of disparage this, and this is obviously a really tight connection between the space race and the nuclear arms race, and they just block it out and say, it was a space race only, we were the good guys, but we weren't flying a flag. You're like, yeah, first of all, it was the US versus the Soviets. You know, the US was very tight with the Allies back then. Maybe they were resentful, but they were very fearful of a Soviet invasion as well, tired of World War II. You know, they were really, it was a tight bond. You know, you don't have that nowadays. You know, more generations you get out, the countries are kind of floating off into their own thing, and they've regained their importance and strength, so they don't necessarily need the U.S. as a protector that's at that point. But, you know, that was really tight-knit community back then. And you had the Soviets who were taking over Eastern Europe, they took over Poland, they took over all the East, you know, and they did that in the 40s and 50s. And those are crucial elements of why the Cold War what it was. I mean, the Soviet Union really helped supply China and help them gain power, and that became all communist. You know, 20% of the world's population might be in China. It's a huge population to switch overnight, boom, from capitalist to communist. We fought in Korea right before this, the space race. Neil Armstrong fought in Korea as well, so it's like, guys, there's a little bit missing there. So, you know, it is what it is, right? Yeah, so basically I would say it's a good story, and it's pretty long, 2 hours, 20 minutes. It probably has to be this long. I would have probably tightened down some of the family scenes and, you know, trim those down a little bit. It seemed like there was a little bit of fat on the editing, and add back in some of the scenes of Sputnik, Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK's speech. They used enough of the JFK speech. I don't think you should use a lot because it's 20 minutes or something in totality. So they used a little snippet where, you know, we're going to race to the moon kind of part of the speech, but they show it at the end of the film instead of in the middle. It's like why did we go to the space race? Kenny kicked it off. Nixon completed it, but Kenny was the one behind it. You know, it's like, let's forget about Nixon's involvement because Nixon's not popular, right? But dude, this guy freaking continued the space race. It wouldn't have happened if Nixon said like, forget it, I'm not gonna do it. At the same time, you have Vietnam in the background and Nixon is behind that and driving that and going down in flames over it. So, you know, the Vietnam's coming up. They don't have that in the background as either. And obviously the protests start more 68, 69, but that's right when the space race is. 69 is like, you know, you're missing a little, you're missing two major wars in American history that are at the same time during the space race. Not, you don't have to have a little bit, but maybe a TV flashback to watching TV, like, oh my God, the Cuban Missile Crisis, what do we do? Boom, you could do that. You could do another segment. Oh, the Vietnam vet are protesting. What do we do here? And they have a little bit of that because there was protests against NASA apparently. I don't know if that's true because they were really hype about NASA, but you know, that probably did happen as far as, you know, the protests, but overall, I like the story. I thought they did a pretty good job. I would have made it a little more 60s footage. I mean, you run into the danger of people saying, oh, it's staged. This proves that the moon landing was fake, right? But there's a lot of conspiracy theorists out there, so they probably didn't want to get too close to the 60s look. But, you know, they have to do more than, I think some of the footage being a more locked off shots and more 60s style filming would have made the film feel a little more authentic. But yeah, overall, I think it was a pretty good film. If you liked my review, give me a thumbs up. If you want to subscribe to my channel, you can do that below. And hope to see you in the next film review.